Hello, everyone, and welcome to this. Oh, there we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Reuters webinar, Input to Insight, Transforming Real-World Evidence Generation with Physicians in Focus. Whenever you're tuning in from, I'm really pleased to have you here. I look forward to your participation as we kick off a really exciting panel here. I'm Mac Bonafide. I lead up the Real-World Evidence team at Veradigm, and I'm joined today by a panel of experts from Pfizer, Bayer, AstraZeneca, and UCB. They'll be introducing themselves shortly. But I personally am really looking forward to hearing their perspectives, their experiences, their pitfalls on what's really an exciting topic. I do have to start with two housekeeping items. We will be taking audience Q&A at the end, towards the end of the panel discussion. Please do use the Q&A function. We'll do our best to get to as many of them we can as possible. Second, this runs for an hour. It will shut off pretty abruptly at the hour point, but we will be sending you a recording of the webinar to the email address that you registered with. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to very briefly introduce Veradigm and why we've chosen to partner on this topic and bring these folks together. Full disclosure, I am a recovering and still part-time academic, but I promise I will keep this very, very brief. So what is the Veradigm Network? So in our industry, there's companies that own a lot of different parts of what we do. There's folks that generate clinical data. There's folks that generate real-world evidence insights. There's folks that service kind of healthcare providers. There's folks that service payers. Something that Veradigm has kind of accumulated over the last several years since its inception a few years ago is this comprehensive end-to-end service that we call the Veradigm Network. We do all of that. So we're an EHR originator. We have our own EHR data. We built the technology. We enhance the technology. It's what the physician sits on and works with when they're working directly with patients. We also help them with rev cycle management. We work in claims and remits. We have a patient engagement platform. So we have all these different steps in the process. And we've got my team that does the real world evidence generation with the offshoot of that process, but also interjecting at key points in that process. And the goal, Veradigm's goal, this is not unique to Veradigm. That's why we're all here. It's to provide better care more economically. And why do we think we're different? We think we do have the scale and the capabilities and kind of the connectivity to do this en masse, to do this bigger, better, faster, as we're all trying to do in our own companies. We call upon and serve multiple facets of healthcare. Our definition of a customer and a partner is intentionally really, really broad. We work hard to work well with everyone, competition and cooperation, as we like to say. Because we're the EHR originator, we can tap into the clinical depth of the clinician notes, but we need that whole process to work well, start to finish. If we have a safety gap, a quality gap, a user gap, any little grain of sand or friction, it's incumbent upon us to fix that. And what I'm excited about is, why did we pick to partner on this? Why are we so excited about this panel discussion today? Is, we've got principles in our development process. And these are straightforward, right? Data fidelity, speed, accuracy, all of those different things. But then there's the subtle ones, the idea of eyes on the patient, not eyes on the technology, which is funny coming from the folks who make the technology. Reduce user friction, minimal changes necessary to workflow. Where can we increase efficiency? We know and live by all of this. But what we really want to hear is, okay, so what? What next? Can we use our technology to better enable physician-centered research activities? I'd love to hear from these panelists. And promise, I'll shut up in a minute here. What's worked? What hasn't worked? That's how we're going to spend this hour and talk about what's next. What can we collectively design for the future of this? So with that, I'm going to pause for intros. Lauren, you're first up on my screen. Do you want to go next? Just introduce yourself.
Sure, Mac, happy to do so. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Lauren Becknell. I'm Vice President and Head of Real World Evidence within our Chief Medical Affairs Office Evidence Generation Platform at Pfizer. It's a pleasure to be here today. My background is in clinical and translational research, as well as biomedical and health informatics.
Jason, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure thing. Happy to be here, especially with this great panel. Jason Lott, I'm at Bayer. I head up our integrated evidence generation group, globally focused on specialty medicine and cell and gene therapy. Background as a real-world evidence researcher, I'm a dermatologist as well, so I'm still in practice, and really great to be here today.
Great, Jacques.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invite. Great to be here and to join the panel to discuss this very interesting topic. Xia Wang, the head of real-world evidence early solution at UCB. So my team is part of a global real-world evidence and digital science at UCB. So together we are implementing end-to-end real-world generation. So prior to joining UCB, I was with AstraZeneca for almost 2 decades. So it's good to meet my ex-AZ colleague here as well. I have a PhD in computational chemistry. So I started my career at AstraZeneca doing computer-aided drug design, then into the clinical science. And for the last almost 10 years, it's really privileged to working in the real-world evidence area, bringing the real-world evidence to the clinical research and the clinical trial innovation. So good to be here and look forward to the discussion today. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Saj, you want to go next?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for the time on this panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and welcome to the audience here. I think you're going to be positively engaged actually with the discussion points. So my name is Sergeant Kostler. I head up the late data science and real world evidence team in oncology research and development at AstraZeneca. It's a global capability that is tasked with supporting a lot of the internal clinical trial decision-making processes, ensuring that we are developing the trials for those patients that need the drugs the most, making sure that we are really not leaving any data point unturned in that decision-making process. My background is in molecular biology and latterly in my career in epidemiology, having revolved around the industry from R&D to clinical into medical affairs and even to the markets, and now back into R&D where my molecular biology heart is sitting. And that has been peppered with some experience actually within the healthcare setting as well. So spent quite a lot of time in the National Health Service as well, really developing tools and capabilities alongside physicians for the patients that need them the most in a real-time fashion. So I'm really looking forward to this and engaging this discussion actually, because it's something that's very close to my heart, and also opportunities that the way that we use and leverage real world data to really help physicians in practice.
So with that, I'm going to jump into what's going to sound like a very dumb question, which is, why are we focusing so much on the physician in this discussion? Why are they so critical to what we're doing? And Jason, you have the misfortune of being a practicing physician, so I'd like to kick it off with you. What do you think about this centered analysis?
Yeah, happy to start. I mean, I'm obviously biased. I think it's really important to engage physicians and the rest of the healthcare team in this topic. I mean, the data are coming, ultimately from healthcare settings for those of us who are using data, from the real world. And so, but understanding, the challenges that physicians face, what they care about, how they can align their incentives with other folks' incentives across the healthcare sector, I think is a really interesting place to start, because perhaps, the healthcare community hasn't been as engaged in real world evidence topics from the biopharma side as we would all like them to be. I mean, physicians are first and foremost caring for the patient in front of them, right? And so I think we have to understand that perspective and always anchor ourselves in terms of the delivery of safe and effective patient care that recognizes the complexity of these healthcare systems and environments that physicians are living in. I'm in the US, right? And so, it can be quite challenging in our fragmented healthcare system. But I think that we only do ourselves a favor in terms of real world evidence generation by understanding its origin. Thanks, Mac.
And thanks. And Lauren, I'm going to poach something that came up when we were getting ready and get excited about this thing where you talked about the vaunted few. I would love to hear your perspective in building on what Jason just said.
Sure, happy to. So I think physicians and clinicians at large are as important as patients and other players within the system. So like Jason, I'm just thrilled to be here speaking specifically about physicians as stakeholders in this. We really look at this as a learning health system. That's an old term now, perhaps, but still every bit as much a goal as it was 10, 15 years ago when it was first minted. And so we want to create a virtuous cycle. in which we are starting to realize some of the goals that have been laid out by folks like Rob Califf at the FDA to bring together research and care. And in order to do that, we have a lot of challenges that we're going to have to tackle. Jason already spoke about the fact that, as a physician, you're interacting with your patients and you don't have a tremendous amount of time to do so in all cases. So we certainly want to understand, what are the workflows like? What are your processes like? From a technology perspective, you mentioned previously, you work at Veradigm. Within an electronic health record system or other system, how can we make this smooth and easy? But in order for us to be able to use data, it has to be meaningful. And that means that it both has to have a semantic set of meanings, which is to say we both have to understand, anyone who creates or uses it, what does this term or what does this data element mean? And then we have to have syntactic agreement, which is, how is it structured? Is it numbers? Is it text? Whatever the case is. There is this other moniker, a term that was created by a gentleman named Chris Shute, and then was also built upon and embroidered upon by Melissa Handel. And it's known as the chasm of semantic despair. There's a cartoon that goes along with it where you can envision two mountains and this valley between them. And then on the bottom, you have a lot of terms that we, as either scientists, technologists, or healthcare providers, all talk about. We all know that genes are important to human health. We all know that labs are important, that diagnostics, et cetera. But the way that we talk about those similar concepts can differ dramatically. And so we're very interested not only in tackling, the process and the people perspective, but also how do we create that shared meaning in a way that's not disruptive of clinical care? How do we find the right and appropriate incentives for this so that we're able to offer patients not only what's state of the art in terms of standard of care, but also what's the future state of the art for breakthroughs that change patients' lives in the case of Pfizer.
Great, thank you. And I love what you said about the learning healthcare system. I think what's great about panels like this is how much quicker that learning can happen. A good idea can spread really, really quickly. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'd like you to pick up on what these guys have said, fill in any gaps, but also, we're going to shift the discussion, Saj, just as fair warning to you. And I'd like to hear, this is all very positive and optimistic, and I'm a chronic optimist, but keeping on a physician perspective, I'd like to start to transition to what are some barriers. So, but if you want to take the first question first, Shaz, like, what do why this focus and what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, happy to. So I think about what we are all together doing, the physician side, the pharmaceutical side, the technology side from Veradigm, is really to putting the patient at the center. What we do, right? Try to improve the healthcare and make sure the patient has the right treatment at the right time. For that regard, I think the physician is really in the front line to do that, right? They are interact with the patient every day. Like Jason mentioned, maybe their primary goal is really to treat the patient, right? For the data part, right? Sometimes what we're thinking, they don't have a lot of time to do that. I think come to that kind of a barrier. What I always thinking about, do we get all the data we need to understand the care, right? Like the secondary usage of EHR data. It's not always that's complete, right? So that's, I think, one of the data barrier we're trying to see if a physician can help improve the data part at the point of care. I think that's the kind of a challenge we're seeing there. And the second point is really, I think, it goes to Lauren just mentioned, to bring the clinical research to the clinical practice of clinical care. I think that's very, very critical for physician, the role to play there. And we talk about a lot about how to use real-world evidence to innovate clinical trial, clinical research, right? We want to, make the trial it's simple, it's faster, it's close to the real world, but it's really hard to do that, right? Bring any kind of programmatical kind of component into the clinical trial is hard, but that's kind of a direction we want to go, to bring the continuum of clinical care with the clinical research and the clinical trial. I think that's, so physician, I think, play a key role. We have a lot of thinking about, sometimes we thinking what physician need, right? Lauren used how we motivate, how we support them, right? What the support they need, so they can think about when they're doing the primary work of in their frontline and thinking about the data and the meaningful way of seeing the treatment, how patients react to that, what is the quality of life, what is the meaningful endpoint for patients, and can feedback to the pharmaceutical industry so we can continue to advance our research to really bring the cutting edge medicine to the patient. So that's kind of my perspective. I think that's why I think this very, very important topic. We don't always talk that a lot. We think this, physician there, they have research physician, they probably have some physician don't do any research at all. But I think this, a little bit, back to Jason's point, is a little bit segment, right? How we can maybe unify this force a little bit better and support the front line, the physician, to really support the patient to get the better care they need.
I think you're spot on. I mean, the stats are something like less than 1% of physicians participate in clinical research, but better than 80% would like to. So Saj, would you like to fill in anything there? And then I'm going to hit you with the next question, so be ready.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was just reflecting on like kind of what Jason, Lauren, and also like Shah mentioned actually. So I think one of the things that was kind of really mulling in my mind is really that the physician is both the consumer of the generation of the evidence. So they are the ones that will be making decisions off the back of hopefully real world evidence. Often don't do that because they don't necessarily trust the data. But then also they have the ability to reinforce what data is available and also make that data more robust. And one piece of experience I have is really when working in the hospital system, the primary stance was always for the clinicians to say, well, we don't trust that data. We don't know how it's been assimilated, or we feel there's gaps in the data. But once you start to iterate and cycle with the clinicians and show them where the gaps are and show them how the data can be used in a bit more of a real-time fashion, that erodes the barriers. And then ultimately it starts the conversation as to, well, maybe we need to be recording this in a different way, or maybe we can use our systems to help us in different dynamics. And I feel like that is the opportunity that we have to start to erode the barriers. So the more open we are about where we are in terms of missing data, the validity of data, fit for purpose data, that can really start to drive a dialogue with physicians to make sure that that time and that feedback loop and the treatment inertia actually kind of is reduced as ultimately with the generation of evidence.
And Matt, before we move on, I think Saj just raised a really good point with regard to physicians not trusting the data. I think we as a community have to come together and start to create a set of standards in somewhat in the way that RCT Duplicate did. This is something that was co-led with the FDA and others, where they looked at a number of diabetes, cardio trials to see, can we recapitulate the results of this gold standard? And let's be clear, I think everyone on the panel would nod their head and say that is the gold standard evidence. Clinical trials, real world evidence is not replacing trials, but can we take that gold standard and recapitulate it using real world data to generate evidence? And then can we describe how, what methods are appropriate and when? How do we identify and control confounders? The last thing I'll say in terms of a challenge is a lot of the data elements that we need aren't necessarily now used in care. So for research in oncology, we desperately care about things like progression and response, as do physicians, of course, but not in every system are those things collected as independent and unique, discrete data. They're there in notes, they're there in images and in other forms of data. And so right now, researchers rely on human beings, a little bit of automation and natural language processing and AI, a lot of human beings to power that deep review of medical records to get those data elements out. If we were able to structure what are those key things that are really going to be drivers of research outcomes, but also of helping physicians to understand their own patient outcomes, that would be truly ideal, but doing so in a way that doesn't disrupt the workflow, because we have, I think, rapidly saturated the available pool of human beings who have the necessary training to accurately do this. I don't know about you, Saj, but when we think about some oncology projects, we're having to map 6 to sometimes 6 months, 12 months out just to make sure that we have those personnel on hand with the vendors and partners that we work with. So I think we have lots of opportunities still to tackle some of these challenges.
So thank you, Lauren. You guys actually teamed up there. I'm going to where I want to go next, which is the barriers, the challenges. Jason, I know in our kind of lead up to this, you had some really great points. I'd like to start with what are your perspective on what's holding us back here?
Yeah, look, I can only echo what was said previously. I think one thing holding back is just the evolution of the purpose of the chart itself, right? So there's some fundamental aspects of charting, right? At some point in time, unfortunately, the chart became as much about supporting billing, right, as it was charting accurate information. And so I certainly understand the skepticism that folks have with respect to real world data, seeing, chart lore get propagated from patient to patient, from encounter to encounter, knowing in real time, right, that you're having lower fidelity data. So I think that's a challenge, right? I think getting the incentives lined up at the physician side, at the patient side, I think enabling these healthcare providers in their local ecosystems, in their healthcare systems, to make that transition on that learning healthcare or health system pathway is tremendously important, and an area where I believe biopharma and the larger sector can play a more important role, adopting common data standards, deployment, right, of technology to the EMR, innovating in the chart itself, capturing those standardized data elements, and a whole host of other opportunities. So I think, insofar as we think about real world evidence and we think about, conducting clinical trials, I think we can also, and I know there's examples out there of, successful implementation science projects, right, where we start addressing those barriers, identifying the barriers the physicians, other healthcare providers, the patients are facing locally, and understanding that the diffusion of technology, doesn't stop at the prescription pad, right? I mean, how do we start tackling these other aspects of technological innovation and bring them to bear to improve the lives of physicians and patients in their local healthcare system? So I think that, there's entire science around doing this effectively. And I think maybe we could start thinking about how we expand our partnership to do so.
So, John, I come to you. I do want to hit on one or two of the questions in the chat. Somebody's asking specifically about the FDA's guidance on the use of RWE for basically regulatory decision making, and I think all of us would applaud that. I think all of our organizations have directly or indirectly contributed to those standards and those guidelines, whether it's through that or through some of our organizations, SPORS, Duke Margolis Foundation. So I think that, Lauren, as you're saying, that's a huge step, is just get us past some of that semantic chasms. We're talking about the same things the same way. Whether you agree with the letter of what's in those documents or not, we all agree that we need a letter in those documents we can start to work from. We can always improve, but we've got to start somewhere. So I think we could take a straw poll vote. I think we all uniformly support and embrace that. So, Jad, do you have anything to add specifically to well, it's either of these topics so far? Let's just keep it rolling.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see. It's quite a lot. It's a very busy area, right? The guidance, and for the last few years, we see a lot of guidance in the regulator to say, this is what do you consider, and how is for the sponsor side and for the data side. They have quite a lot detailed description. What's expectation? It's not exactly tell you what to do, right? So you still have to follow the guidance and the test case and have engagement with regulatory. But I think it's really give me this impression that regulatory is open, right? We want to support. We want to use real world evidence to support the regulatory decision making in the way some of area like it's a rare disease, right? There's a very small patient population, and it's hard to have the comparable the traditional the placebo arm to do that. So you have to use real world evidence to understand the patient population, not on the treatment, then compare with the patient on the treatment. So I think there are some barriers or some reality, you have to think of real world evidence. And we see a lot of use cases, right? For the rare disease, for oncology, using the real world evidence supporting the regulatory decision making. Sometimes even maybe it's not, you still need to do a large trial, but it's kind of conditional approval. So you see that use case. And I think it's very for the sponsor side, this is very, welcome, we're open, let's discuss. But the path is not easy, right? For it's not a standard, a framework. You do this 1, 2, 3, 5 things every time. You need to have a question, bring proposal, have discussion with the regulatory. And some disease area may be very, very, rare or ultra rare. You need to educate each other, right? What I mean, how we do things. So I think, I think it's positive, definitely. We see this is area getting more and more attentions. We want to do things. We want to bring I think this bring the clinical research, bring the clinical trial close to the care. I think that's kind of fundamental thing we do. But how we do this in a very scientific vigor, right? So we can still get to the things and meaningful to support our decision making. So that's kind of a perspective there.
Well, thank you. So Lauren, I want to come back to something you talked about, the virtuous cycle of learning healthcare systems. I think that's where this can kind of feed in. We've talked a little bit, and we're going to dig into these topics more deeply about trust and the gap, and how do you show a physician their role in real world evidence generation? How do you show them why some of these things are important? And yes, Jason, if they're doing it for billing, we have other purposes, they have other purposes. Everybody has another purpose, but their purpose is to provide care. So setting, we can save that to unpack a little bit. But Lauren, how do we enable, from your perspective, how do we enable and make this easier? I hate to say motivate, because we know physicians are motivated, but how do we enable and support physicians in this quest that we find vitally important that might be secondary to them?
Sure. So I think that there are some examples where this has been successful or is being successful. So one would be in the US, there is a group that banded together under something called Codex. And that was using some data standards, having very strong physician engagement from 10 different sites, and having this ability to interplay and exchange data. Some of those data elements that I mentioned previously that are so critically important for oncology researchers, and of course also important for clinicians, those are the things that this program was looking to structure. And so by having clinician scientists, researchers from pharma and biotech, technology companies, and other individuals around the table, there was, I think, a real sense of success from the early pilot, the initial pilot, and then scaling up, I believe, to now 10 sites, perhaps it's even more at this point, to really try and capture that information. So I think at least on those limited scales, we've been able to see, even in that just one example, some success. But I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take having some sort of a coalition where we have physicians who are able to carve out time to do this work, physician scientists, and other cross-functional parties, talking about we all share an end goal, which is improving the health and the lives of patients. How do we get there together? And then how do we make sure that we have the right processes in place to where we're not disrupting clinical care and workflows, but also how do we have technologies that make this easier? It's certainly not going to be simple, and I think it's also going to take policy on behalf of many federal governments and other authorities worldwide to have things in place that, again, provide incentives and make it a bit easier to do so. It's a challenge, but I think it's one that we're all up for, no matter where you are in that learning health system.
And selfishly, Veradigm could, to some of the questions in the chats about like how do we do more collection, how do we fill this gap? Veradigm, we could make the EHR collect everything that I could ever want as an RW researcher, and I would be thrilled for the 2 patients that get complete data on it. And our physicians would mutiny and they would leave because we can't ask, it's like I said, it's every 2 minutes they're looking at this, they're not looking at the living being right next to them. So that's where we have to come up with in that coalition. Can the priorities, can the middle ground percolate to the top? So Saj, you've been at this from a number of perspectives for a while. What do you think would be a good strategy for this?
I think Lauren just hit the nail on the head, right? We need to set up the framework, provide a North Star, and provide the incentives to get to that North Star. And at present moment, it seems like we're all tackling the same barriers from various different angles. From an epidemiological perspective, we just take what we get given and we try to build methodology to overcome the issues with the raw data, and try to build lots of different methodologies to overcome those issues. But I think connecting us all together, building out a framework, building out almost a objective and a vision as to how we could use this data for research purposes. How do we envisage these data to really inform a learning healthcare system? How do we ensure that physicians and researchers have trust in the data that is being generated, and ultimately the data is then being used, is quite critical. I think I always do reflect on the use of data for billing purposes, right? So, that in the UK, we have a very similar situation where there's almost a claims-like data set that is established, and that's used for reimbursement purposes within hospital settings. Now, the incentive's there. The incentive is, if you don't record the data, you don't record the comorbidities, you don't record these particular observations, the hospital doesn't get paid for that activity. Now, is that the best incentive? No, it isn't. Maybe we need to think holistically about real world data and about how we utilize real world data and incentivize that in a different way. And physicians and clinicians and the care industry always want to make sure that they're providing the best care they can possibly give. And what we found quite a lot in our research panels was physicians always wanted to know where they stood amongst other physicians. They wanted to make sure that they were thriving to give the best standard of care to their patients. Maybe that's the incentive. Maybe that's what we need to center around, like kind of how do we make sure that we're incentivizing the use of the data in a way that it can be utilized, but ultimately then starts to generate this cycle of improving the quality of the data as well over time.
So Jason, I would love for you to, one thing I was impressed about you, Jason, is your ability to bridge the macro and the micro, because you've done it hands-on and you've done it macro like the rest of us. What bring us back to that encounter, and bring us back to, we've just talked about some really cool big picture stuff, but how do we make it personal? No pressure.
Yeah, look, I mean, what Sajjan just said really resonates with me. I think, how knowing I'm taking time to enter data, any healthcare provider, right? Knowing you're taking time to enter data, how can you motivate and incentivize patients to not patients, physicians and other healthcare providers to record the right data? And I think that idea of feedback, right, is really powerful in terms of benchmarking and and really helping physicians understand just what type of care they're delivering, who they're delivering it to, with respect to their overall community in which they work, or other patients, like their patient panels. I think is tremendously powerful. The caveat there, right, is that you can get overwhelmed with these types of metrics, right? And I used to work at the Veterans Administration here in the U.S., which I loved. My father's a vet, and but that was always a concern, right? I mean, having so many flags, in the EMR system, and making sure we're not just clicking through things, or we measuring the right stuff. And so it's a balance. It's a balance between capturing the right information. I think that connection to the macro, though, is if someone understands that those data are going to be used for quote unquote higher purposes, right? To really understand disease better, to understand who should be getting therapy, to tackle the pragmatic challenges in front of physicians and other healthcare providers on a day-to-day basis, because the label is a very small, narrow slice of reality, as we all know, right? Most patients are not in the label. Most medicine is off-label. And so, I think understanding how we can tackle those problems that are confronting the provider who's at the EMR in the room, hopefully facing the patient, like you said, Mac, with those data entry, that's a compelling value proposition.
Well, thank you. And that's exactly what I want to do, is bring it into the personal encounter, because that's what we're focusing on here, is the physician, the end of one at a time. Zhao, have you guys tried anything? You've done this again in a couple different companies in a few different therapeutic areas covering rare and ultra not rare. What's your perspective on how we bridge this? I know some of the things that we want to get into is, how do we build this trust? How do we show physicians what their data is a part of without overwhelming them? So I'd love to hear your perspective on how do we start to, we've just identified the gap in the chasm. I'd really love for us to spend some time figuring out the bridge.
Yeah. So I think it's in the way of we talk about this motivation, right? It's a very sort of for physician to support the better data collection, and when they are doing busy to the care. What is the key thing is, and I was thinking about healthcare is a quite personal thing for for a lot of people, and also for physician, is using the data when we show that you're going to learn in the healthcare system and to better improve the care. So that's one motivation for them to do. Some of them working in the rare or ultra, there's not a lot of treatment available. So getting the data into support the research, getting the better treatment, that's motivation. So it's interesting. I was working across the chronic and the rare, and that's kind of a disease area. It's always challenging the data. You think sometimes chronic, right? Diabetes, right? Or asthma or COPD. It's a lot of data, a lot of patient there. But then when we really want to understand, the outcome, right? Sometimes a physician has assessment with the patient together, but they probably don't record everything, right? They will ask you 3 questions, and you answer that, you will see, then that's it. Then later on we dig out the data, trying to understand what is the reason, for example, for switch medication, right? Why this work, that doesn't work. We couldn't really get to the point of the answer. That's the way is really to see. I think that all the healthcare eventually will go to the precision medicine, right? We're very personalized healthcare. What is the best treatment for me, for individual patient? That's really the answer. But to get there, we need all this data as really good, and the high quality data we can trust as a good foundation to do that research. So that's one thing. And in the rare disease particular, I think many of us get involved with gene therapy nowadays, right? This is maybe one-time treatment or going to halt a disease, but you need to understand really the patient journey, right? What is the disease progression since the day one they carry that genetic factor, and then until they show the symptoms? What is the right time to really interview patient to get that benefit? And we don't have a lot of data to understand the disease, so we have to kind of need to run another registry or natural history study to reinvent lots of wheel, get the patient and get data. Is another burden, for the healthcare system as well for the patient. So I think I think in my perspective, we do need to have building this trust, collaboration with the physician, with the frontier, and to show what's in there for them, what's in there for us to develop to the new treatment. So building understanding, right? So maybe there's one data, and that's also technology going to help physician to lower their workload to getting that data to support that. So I think that's really the way we need to truly understand each other. What's the needs there? What's the driver there? And how we can help each other to get to, serve the ultimate goal for both sides.
And I think that what we would love to figure out is, where can technology enable that? Because Lauren, Lauren, you made a comment in the build up to this, is we can't just throw more money at it. Yesterday's technology is not going to solve today's and certainly not tomorrow's problems. We're going to run out of curators. So my question is, where can we use automation? Where can we, let's say we went to a practice and said, hey, there's this clinical trial. We think you might have some patients that apply to it. Oh, by the way, we've simulated what it might look like if you ran this trial in your practice, or if your 10 patients got access to this medication. So there's the question is that how we enable trust? We all probably have tons of peer-reviewed publications to our name. We can throw that at physicians all day long. We can throw it at payers all day long. That seems like yesterday's solution. I apologize to any journal editors on the meeting. That seems like yesterday's solution because it's a model that you're presenting something inherently that happened 2 years ago that you finished the study on a year ago and it just gets into press today. So how do we show physicians their data today? How do we show them the insights to help their decision making for the patient they're going to see in 7 minutes and have 7 minutes with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we were talking about a pair, I would say, we at Pfizer have had some really interesting successes in terms of risk sharing models around co-adjudicating data, where we will give money back guarantees on some of our medicines. For example, if you achieve this outcome and it's maintained and it's durable for a certain amount of time, we get full reimbursement. If they only achieve 20% of that outcome, it's a very different number. But when we're talking about clinicians, I think it becomes much more complex. There's a question in the chat about an individual who is a clinical trial pharmacist in South Africa. And I think they're raising a really good point in that when we think about clinical trials, it's clean. You are asking a set of questions, you are having care be delivered in a certain time frame, there's a schedule of events. When you're looking at real world evidence and you're thinking globally with clinicians and across multiple different therapeutic areas and departments in hospital or clinic, then you get into issues where the standard of care can be very different. Supportive care can be incredibly different. Healthcare coverage, concerns about financial toxicities, all of these things are very different. And I think technology can be an enabler there, but we may be looking at a scenario where there's not a silver bullet. There's not a one size fits all solution. Rather, there probably are certain types of activities that are more amenable to having standardized technology solutions. For example, it may be things where we might say there's a study. It could be a clinical trial. It could be an observational, non-interventional study or a low interventional study that your patient may be eligible for. And that's something that you can put in front of the physician for their decision making or in front of a patient for them to bring it up with their provider. Those sorts of processes probably are more open and amenable. Maybe in some ways, some of the endpoints, if we can give endpoints back to clinicians, explain why it's important to capture number one, but also give that back to them in terms of reports that are reliable, either for clinical decision support or for kind of, patients like mine types of approaches for healthcare planning. But where you're, it's all going to depend, I think, on the problem that we're trying to solve. And we all know that healthcare is very complex and on a global scale. I think we may have, if we're lucky, like 30 to 50% where we can look for those sorts of automation technological solutions. And then the other 40, 60%, we're going to have to be looking at how do we individually work with people or individually understand what are those 80% questions for a particular disease area, and then think through a mix of technology as well as implementation support within individual centers, because we all know, of course, every electronic health records implementation tends to be an N of one. Maybe Veradigm will say that that's not true, but would love definitely to also hear from Jason, who probably has far deeper insights than I do as a practicing physician.
Lauren, it's very hard to follow you. So spot on, completely agree. I think this idea of, leveraging technology that's pragmatically relevant. So, Mac, I think you mentioned also, sort of how do we figure out patients like me for the patient in front of me or the patient like this? So, can we see, I see maybe 10 to 20% opportunity of deploying these algos on top of real world data to say, okay, here's a patient like yours, and let's model the counterfactual if they did not get this care, or model a counterfactual if they did get this alternative care and what their disease course could look like. So I see that as an ample area of opportunity where maybe there's the next level of EMR in the future that can help, support that type of technology, and that would require, I think, deep partnership with biopharma and patient level data sharing in a privacy preserving way to make that type of work happen. I think biopharma can come to the table and say, look, we're trying to further calibrate our trials to reflect the real world, right? For your patient's experience and your practice experience, how can we deploy tokenization to have a seamless transition from the trial into the real world, and we have follow-up, right? And that experience is being captured in a way that extends the external validity and generalizability and transportability of these trial results. And so I think we can make intentional efforts to further that trust beyond, like you said, Mac, here's my CV and here's how many PubMed publications I have, to I think really endogenize and engage the patients and the physicians and the healthcare systems in the way we're running these very complex, big, and important studies, right? I think there's room for improvement. It's going to be a compromise, right? Because it's always usually easier to run something, very clean, and that may not have as much external validity or generalizability, but I think that's an important component. And I think physicians will have greater trust and more willingness to partner in these types of innovative approaches, right, which really marry the real world data with the primary evidence generation and trials. And that's a new frontier. And so I think we're seeing a confluence, right, of regulatory changes. We're seeing a confluence of the methods, the technology, the data standardizations, the algos. And now I think we move on to say, okay, how can we further that trust at the physician level and maybe really take the next step in terms of how we're generating evidence.
Saj, would you like to add something to that?
You think it's hard going after Lauren, Jason? It's hard to go after you after Lauren. So, I think the only comment I would make is I just love the direction of this discussion, because I think what we're getting to is that incentive, right? So what can we do with the EMR to ensure that we're building and adding value to that engagement that the physician has with the patients? So without good quality data, that engagement and these capabilities are not possible. So you're ultimately incentivizing the reason why that data should be collected so that they can leverage like kind of the capabilities. And the likes of Facebook haven't found it very hard for us to input data into their tools, because we immediately see the value add when we put data into capabilities like that, because we're sharing, we're able to socially connect with other people. I think what we need to do is try and find a mechanism whereby these EMR systems aren't seen as administrative systems, but capabilities and tools to help them deliver scaled care. And I think I feel that might be an opportunity. And us as industry partners, we need to be able to say, well, hold on, this isn't directly impactful to the work that we need to do from an RWE perspective, but we want to be part of the dialogue because we believe that this will improve types of data that we generate in the real world data set, in the real world data space. And I think, that's really where the cross collaboration can really happen.
Thank you for that. And I think what strikes me is it's a similar discussion as we were wrestling with payers years and years ago, saying how do you show a payer that our result applies to their results? And you show them by showing them. You show them by having transparent methods and high quality data, and you show them by saying, here's what we did in this multi-payer set, and we'll help you run it in yourself. And to the extent that we could do that with a physician, now the trick there is with the payer, you're debating a formulary cycle that'll start in 10 to 12 months. With the payer, it needs to be embedded in the technology for the patient they're about to see, and knowledge and stuff changes. We've got about 12 minutes left. I want to end on a high note, but I would love to hear some horror stories. Halloween's coming up. What have we tried that doesn't work? I know on the Veradigm side, we've tried to put a lot of things in front of providers, and we're always worried about click box fatigue. We're very conscientious that we can put anything in front of them. We can't make them click it, and we need to make sure they're clicking on the things they need to be clicking on, frankly. So when we do things where we require voluntary enrollment, we've learned that you need to take clear, simple messaging, clear, easy consent processes, minimal burden, and lots of time and lots of reminders about what this is, and then to build the trust for what it is, what it isn't. So So Zhao, or actually anybody here, if you've tried something to take a step in this direction that hasn't worked, I think that's going to be as informative as all the bridge building discussions we just had.
I do have an example actually. I won't name like kind of any institutes or systems here. So it was really the implementation of clinical decision support for prescriptions actually. So it was like kind of a rule based was set up, and as soon as physicians started to type in the prescription for a particular drug, all kinds of alerts would appear, like you can't give that drug because of this X, Y, and Z, and all these different alerts would pop up. Now there was like alert fatigue at the physician end, and what they used to do is they used to just put dots and then the drug that they wanted to prescribe, and try to get around like kind of the electronic system in a way that allowed them to do that. And this became such a observation that we used to have to count the number of dot prescriptions that were given to patients, because these were like kind of clearly people that didn't want to get any alerts at all. So I think back to Jason's point, you can get a lot of fatigue if you start to put lots of rules into systems. Physicians are people and don't necessarily want to be constrained as well.
Yeah, so maybe I can add a little story. So this is not exactly the use case or the experience. So we talk about this. I really thinking. I thought you mentioned the physician. Just like any of us humans, right? They cannot be really bounded by a lot of technology. Write something, or I think we need this data. We need that data. And I remember years ago we had this interview and with some physician doing the clinical trial. And so the discussion got really talk about the real world evidence, how this connecting, the burden of the clinical trial, the data. So one of the physicians actually mentioned, I said, what do you in the wild world, what do you hope you get through technology to help you? And the physician really said, he really wants to spend all the time with the patient, right? Doing the conversation, talk about the questions, and he want to have AI. So this is a kind of really a really assistant, right? As kind of a personal assistant, sit next to maybe just on the table, or some kind of a really fancy tool there, just to record everything and to process the data into the meaningful way for the research to do. So that's what is maybe it's just a kind of a hope in the future something happen, and you have some really kind of AI to, right? Open the TV or give you music. That's your iPhone, your Siri can do that. But what they're really asking is a technology to enable them to do better job and actually to help automation the data. So if we get to that point, I think they can really get to do this kind of work and getting the quantity data we need. So that's really kind of is eye open for me to think it's a long journey for us to get there to help them to do a better job in the future.
I'm proud of us. We went 53 minutes before anybody mentioned AI. I think that's like a record these days. I think you're spot on, and I think what I'm struck by is the small technology things we can do along the way. So I think somebody in the chat's mentioning the huge differences in the U.S. and EU, and one of those things from prior auth. There's a different prior auth or multiple prior auths for each payer, and can the EHR help navigate that? Can there be REMS checks built into the EHR for authorization? Everything like that, those little grains of sand that you can remove, I think those add up. It doesn't have to be a comprehensive, several of you guys referred to, let's find out, we were calling it a problem, but let's break it into 15 little problems and figure out which ones we can solve tactically with technology and with trust building and with real evidence generation. We're heading into some final thoughts. I want to end positive. That's just the way that's the way we try to do things at Veradigm, is end on a good note. So we've talked about some of the challenges. There's obviously a huge gap. There's a bridge here. There's a chasm we have to cross. What are you guys most excited about? We'll go around the horn. get everybody's perspective. What are you guys most excited about as a potential solution to this? Although if you want to start with a horror story and then go to the potential solution, I think I'll accept that as well, but we have to end positive. So Lauren, do you want to take it away?
I think I'm most excited about the fact that I believe it was Jason that kind of mentioned the level of shared motivation in many different sectors to tackle this problem together. The recognition that it's a horror story in and of itself, right? We're talking about something that's incredibly complex. You could probably chop it into 20,000 components. None of them are easy, but they're certainly something that has tremendous value if we're able to deal with them. The second thing I would say, and I know we talked about this in our prep discussion a bit, but haven't mentioned it here today, is in the US, there's some exploration of this, I think, in UK and Germany by some companies, is this notion of tokenization. I think most people on the call are probably pretty familiar with that, but in case you aren't, it is using a blockchain-based technology. Sorry, we made it 55 minutes without saying that word. But it's using a technology that essentially allows data from different healthcare systems, from your pharmacy, from wherever you might receive care, and from other types of data, whether it's information that you might put into a health app on your phone or information that you might type into a PRO-based research kind of an app as a patient or as a physician, to take all of those bits of data and to be able to cross or interlink those data while maintaining patient confidentiality. We have to do so, of course, in a way that ultimately maintains the total confidentiality of the patient, and to do so in a way that we have accurate matching. So there's another set of problems that we're kind of creating here. But that is, I think, incredibly exciting, because some of the challenges that we have at research is it's very difficult to really get an accurate longitudinal perspective of what's happening to us, whether you're a physician, a researcher, or something else. It's hard to know what has happened over the course of the last 10 to 15 years in the care of this patient that is meaningful for whatever it is that I'm trying to do at this time. And so I think that's a technology that can help us to tackle that question. Of course, again, it probably is unlikely to be its own silver bullet, but it's quite exciting.
Excellent, thank you. Shah?
Yeah, I think I just add a few, kind of closing thoughts about that. So I feel this is I'm quite hopeful and quite positively. I know this is a challenge topic, and we talk about a lot of things. I think this, the transparency, the trust, and have a shared vision and break into pieces to the problem. I like that. And for me personally, I feel it's quite a privilege working in this area for more than 20 years. And from the discovery research, all the way to the approval and the post-marketing activities. It's not easy. Every day has different questions and different challenges. But it's really exciting to do this kind of work and to see the new things come, and really it's together, I think, drive the solution and the bright future for everyone.
Thank you. Jason?
Sorry, I coughed right when I think you said my name. So look, I'll be brief.
Yes.
I'm an optimist. I mean, I think that all of this technology and all of this math and all of these data have really, for me at least, opened up the possibilities to really reimagine the role of biopharma and the healthcare system writ large. And so that's what I'm excited about, right? What is going to be the new role of partnerships and collaboration between the biopharma sector, the rest of the healthcare sector, physicians and patients? And, to me, I think it's so exciting. We can build upon the wisdom and experience of the past, and I really think we can create a new future. So I'm happy about that.
There you go. Thank you, Taj.
So I think, just to Jason's point, I think that we're at a very good place in terms of the maturity of technology and capabilities. I think the thing that I'm most optimistic about is the people, right? I think we have got such a fantastic set of experiences that have led us to this point right now, where I think with the right intention, with the right direction, with the right motivation, we can really do something quite special in this space and really kind of jump to that next level. So I'm super excited about engagements like this, engagements that I'm having externally with academic centres, engagements that I'm having with healthcare systems. The people is really what is making the future, actually. So I'm super excited about that aspect of this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we've shined some light on the known unknowns where we know what we have to grapple with. We know how to part it out, and we've got the right people, technology enabled to solve that. So guys, thank you all. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your perspectives, your experiences. I appreciate your candor in the good and the bad. So I look forward to doing this again sometime. And Reuters, thank you so much for hosting the platform, and audience for your participation. Thanks, everyone.